Good afternoon. My name is Conor Quinlan and I'm going to give a brief presentation providing an overview of the National Hydrometric Monitoring Network, hydrological data sources available in Ireland, and how we classify hydrology status for supporting conditions under the Water Framework Directive in Ireland. The EPA has statutory responsibility under the EPA Act to prepare a National Hydrometric Monitoring Programme. Currently, the programme is running from 2018 to 2021, and a subsequent programme will run from 2022 to 2027. The programme includes stations operated by the EPA and local authorities, the Office of Public Works, the ESB and Waterways Ireland. Currently, the programme consists of 367 strategic stations, 416 operational stations and 31 project stations. Station types include river flow, river and lake level, and spring flow monitoring stations. Coordination between the participating groups is achieved via the National Hydrometric Working Group. So where is this data available? Well, EPA and local authority data is available on EPA HydroNet. There are a number of tabs on the portal for surface water level and flow, including rivers and lakes, and groundwater levels. Spring flows and turlock levels are on the surface water tab. Because this is the portal for the national programme, stations operated by all of the member organisations are shown on the website, and when you click on individual stations there will be links into the portals run by those organisations where you can obtain the data other than the EPA hydrometric data. All EPA hydrometric data is in open data format, therefore all spot flows and time series that we have are downloadable on the website in a CSV format. Office of Public Works hydrometric information can be found at waterlevel.ie for all active and inactive stations. The water level data can be queried on this site, and where water flow information exists and archive information exists, you can click through to the hydro data portal that the OPW also maintain. And again, their data is all available data can be found by clicking through the links on this website. Geological Survey of Ireland data can be obtained on the website gwlevel.ie. The portal currently contains predominantly turlock monitoring stations, but there are also a number of borehole monitoring stations located in the east of the country. The data can be queried and downloaded from that website. ESB hydrometric information can be obtained via their website under the Generation and Trading section. The various hydropower schemes can be seen listed on the left-hand side. The Liffey Dam information for Pullafuka, Golden Falls and Leak Slip Dam on the Liffey scheme, Inishcara and Carrigadrohad dams on the River Lee scheme, Ardnacrusha Dam and Partine Weir on the Shannon scheme, Kathleen's Falls Dam and Cliff Dam on the Erne scheme, and the Clady dams on the River Clady scheme in Donegal. Marine Institute data is also available from their website. If you go into the real-time observations section or the data services, you can see a number of data services available to be queried and downloaded. Integrated marine observations, marine data buoy network, wave buoys, tidal observations, and a selection of data from the Burrishoole research catchment. A wealth of data there queryable for around the coast, and all easily accessible via the website. A monthly summary of the national hydrological picture is also obtainable via the National Hydrology Bulletin, which is published each month on the EPA website. The bulletin started production exactly 1 year ago, following agreement between the EPA, Office of Public Works, Geological Survey and Met Éireann. Quite simply, the bulletin provides a high-level snapshot of the current state of hydrology at the end of each calendar month. The first section summarises overall trends and provides a very brief description of the weather in the preceding month. The next section focuses on river flows and a colour-coded map where shades of blue indicate higher than average flows for that month, green indicates normal flows, and oranges and red low or particularly low flows. There are also a series of colour-coded monthly graphs. The graphs of 1 year duration show the hydrograph over the previous year and the colour classes of low, normal and high range flows as per the map. Similarly, lake level data is presented in the same way with a colour-coded map and graphs, and groundwater levels and spring flows are presented again with color-coded graphs and a color-coded map. Specific details on the metrics used are then provided at the back of the bulletin. Modelled data for ungauged catchments is also available on EPA water maps. The Hydro tool can be found by clicking into EPA water maps and then selecting the drop-down menu Monitoring and Flow at the top. From this you can turn on the Hydro tool layers and the associated contributing catchments. When you've done this, if you click on a point, it'll bring up the data menu that you can see on the left there. This menu contains various catchment descriptors used in the model, and it also contains estimated flow duration curve information. There are two types. There are percentiles, annualized percentile flows, and there are monthly and annualized mean flows. So if you look at the bottom on the left, you can see NAT MMF 1, 2, and 3. That's January, February, March, and that continues as you scroll down. Naturalized mean monthly flows for each month. Above that, you can see NAT AMF. That's the annual mean flow, and above that, you've got the flow percentiles. So if you look at NAT Q95, that is the Q95 or the 95th percentile flow in that river, the estimate, and it's 1.25 cubes a second. All measurements on the website are in cubes per second. Now there are uncertainties in this, and I must emphasize these are also naturalized flows. This model takes account of catchment descriptors, but it does not take account of influences on flows such as abstractions, discharges, or impoundments. So I suppose it provides an estimate of the flows we would expect to see in the river under natural conditions were there no human influences. Therefore, if you know there are significant abstractions and discharges upstream of the point you're interested in, then using this model, it's not really applicable for in such cases. The limitations, to re-emphasize this, it's naturalized flow, and in many locations where there are significant abstractions or discharges upstream, it won't represent real-world conditions. The naturalized flow is the flow that would be present if there were no impoundments, discharges, or abstractions present. It does not represent the present actual flow in the river. It has very limited accuracy downstream of impoundments, lake outflows, and in highly karstified catchments. Now, most of the karstified catchments in the country have been edited out of the model because the model doesn't reflect reality there, but there are a number of instances where there may be spring flows or swallow holes and the model may be not reflecting reality. So it does have to be treated with a degree of caution when you're looking at a catchment that's underlain by karstifiable limestone. Also, a number of small coastal catchments have not been modelled, and the majority of records that are used in the modelling start post 1976. So, especially in light of the work that's been done over the past few years by Icarus in Maynooth, we've been in a pretty wet period over the past 40 years, and in terms of long-term, I suppose more representative low flow statistics, the model may overestimate low flows. So it's, that's just a factor of the data that we've used in the model, but that does have to be borne in mind. In terms of uncertainty estimates for the model, you can see in the table at the bottom a factorial standard error. If you take the mean flow to be someplace between the Q20 and Q30, the factorial standard error for the mean flow is about 16%. Whereas when you go to the lower flows at the Q95, the factorial standard error is 56%. And I suppose that just reflects, the increased uncertainty when you get to the more extreme ends of the flow duration curve. So when you're looking at mean flows, this is pretty representative, it's pretty accurate. When you're looking at very low flows, there's wide error margins, and real world data vitally important just to ground truth this and to sense check it. But nevertheless, it's a useful tool in ungauged catchments where we don't have any actual field measurements to start out with. The Office of Public Works Flood Studies Update Portal is also a very important source of modelled hydrological information for Ireland. The website is accessible once you sign up, and it provides a wealth of information including flood frequency and return periods, index QMed for ungauged sites, estimates of that, which are essentially for the 2-year return period flood, various hydrograph analyses, base flow indexes, and catchment descriptors. And it is an invaluable tool in hydrological assessment in the country. So, in terms of how we use this data for Water Framework Directive status assessment, what do we mean by eflows, and what are eflows in the context of the Water Framework Directive? And the basic premise of eflows, which for the Water Framework Directive actually are ecological flows and not environmental flows. So when we talk about eflows in WFD, we specifically mean ecological flows. And the basic premise is that the biota of a river are adapted to the naturally present hydrological regime. It's an important component of supporting conditions for achievement of WFD objectives. For WFD purposes, the definition of an eflow is an hydrological regime consistent with the achievement of the environmental objectives of the Water Framework Directive in natural surface water bodies. It must support the achievement of good or high ecological status objectives or support objectives for protected areas. And I suppose at a high level, the eflow is broadly similar to what would be naturally present, or as similar as possible to maintain a natural flow in a water body. The principles that I suppose the overarching principles of ecological flows, firstly, that channel shape, channel form, and the habitat complexity that derives from that leads to specific biotic diversity in a water body, and that should naturally be present there. The second principle, that life history patterns in terms of spawning and recruitment are adapted to the hydrology of a river and the impact that that has on the morphology in terms of the substrata and in terms of when you get low flows, when you get flows to allow fish to move upstream, for example, and how sediment is moved through the system and where that creates gravel beds, etc. That the life systems are finely tuned and adapted to the natural conditions in a water body. Principle 3, the principle of connectivity, longitudinal connectivity, so that there are no barriers for the upstream or downstream movement of fish or sediment, for example, or even insects. And that is being seen as increasingly important now over the past number of years. And also lateral connectivity, that the river is allowed to flood and the impact that such flooding will have on reducing peak velocities in the main channel and the impact that will have on its morphology and as a result the species in the channel. And principle 4, that a resilient and a healthy natural regime discourages invasions, that healthy ecosystems are resilient ecosystems, and therefore to maintain the biology of a river and its supporting elements or lake in as close to natural condition as possible will make them more resilient to anthropogenic or climatic stressors into the future. In an Irish context, well, there's currently no national regime of abstraction management or eflows in Ireland. A comprehensive review was carried out by Webster et al. Lit Review in 2015 and a final report in 2017, and that report concluded that there's currently insufficient evidence to produce bespoke Irish eflow standards. Further research regarding flow augmentation driven ecological impacts on Irish aquatic habitats is therefore required, and some of that is currently ongoing since. Therefore, in the meantime, existing eflow assessments that we have tried to carry out have used the existing UK Northern Ireland eflow standards. So how has that been done and how have we applied these standards? Well, as I said, they're derived initially from UK standards until the Irish evidence base is developed, and they're based on flow duration statistics. Cumulative approach assessing consumptive abstraction only, individual Water Framework Directive water body objectives, which are more stringent for high sensitivity catchments and for low flows. It's a straightforward approach, it's consistent, it's precautionary, derived from naturalised flows, so you're getting back to the reference condition, I suppose, and it can be easily updated as the evidence base develops, so it's not overly complex and it's easy to understand. It's risk-based and it's tiered. You use modelling to get to a detailed desk assessment where it needs be, and in certain cases that will drive field investigations. So the risk, I suppose, drives the degree of work and the degree of investigation that is carried out on particular water bodies. So how does this work in practice? Let's look at the example of what was undertaken for the second cycle River Basin Management Plan characterisation risk assessment screening. It was completed in 2017 using UK eflow standards. Classified rivers into 3 abstraction sensitivity classes, and the allowable abstraction in each river class is calculated as a percentage of the mean daily flow at the Q95 level, with different standards for high and good status objective water bodies. So if you look at the map on the right hand side, you can see the 3 abstraction sensitivity classes applied to Irish catchments. And essentially, it's a measure of river flashiness or base flow. So the catchments that are highly sensitive to abstraction pressure are the very high rainfall western areas, the upland areas across the country. Those classified as medium sensitivity are the central lowland areas and most of the east. And there were a few small areas that came out as low sensitivity under the UK system, mostly located on the east coast. It must be remembered that high status objective water bodies, irrespective of which of these areas they fall into, have stricter abstraction limits due to their higher environmental objectives. And the standards that were applied then to each of these river classes are as follows. In that 2017 example, the Northern Ireland EFlow standards were used. So you have A1, and if you see column 1 here on the top table, A1, A2 and A2 headwaters and C2 and D2. They correspond to the low, medium and high sensitivity classes for abstraction. And as you can see in this table here, this shows you at the various flow percentiles what can be taken out of each of those classes. So if we look at the column on the right hand side, this is at the Q95 at and below the Q95 in A1, which are the low sensitivity catchments. You can take out 20% of the flow. In the medium sensitivity, you can take out 15% of the flow, and in the high sensitivity, you can take 10% of the flow. If we look over at column 2, this is at the exceeding above the Q60. For low sensitivity, you can take out 35% of the flow, medium 30%, and highly sensitive 25% of the flow. So you can take out quite a lot of water at high flows, provided you have somewhere to store it. So this essentially shows you that, if you can store water, there's a lot available. If you can't store water, you're essentially restricted to what you can take under the driest conditions. And if we look at the table at the bottom, this is for high status objective water bodies. No matter where they are, no matter what sensitivity class the catchment falls into, once they're high status objective, stricter limits apply. So above the Q95, at all flow percentiles above the Q95, you can take a maximum of 10% of the instantaneous flow. When it's at or below the Q95, you can take no more than 5% of the flow. So they're quite restrictive, but these are quite simple as well. They're easy to understand and they can be changed as the evidence base is developed. In terms of how lakes were assessed in 2017, well, the assessment process followed that was used or developed in 2009 in the National Programmes of Measures Standard Study Revised Risk Assessment Methodology in Ireland. And the method that entails is to produce a ratio of known net abstractions to the Q50 inflow, that is the median inflow of the lake. The net abstractions are the total known abstractions minus any known discharges in or upstream of a lake. If the ratio of the net abstractions to the Q50 inflow is greater than 0.1, the lake is screened in for further assessment. At this point, further assessment has not been carried out, but it's envisaged that when regulation and licensing for abstraction comes in, that a more detailed second-tiered assessment will be required. At the moment, possible candidate is the UK tag type approach, which could be used providing the data was available. And essentially what that method does is look at the temporal variation of lake surfaces. So you need the natural lake surface and you need the impacted lake surface area in order to carry out this method successfully. And under this method, the daily maximum percentage reduction in lake surface area in 99% of days in the year can't exceed 1% for high status, can't exceed 5% for good status, 10% for moderate status, and if it exceeds 20%, it's poor status. The required data and capabilities to produce these assessments: we need the ecological condition and environmental objective information for each water body. We need long-term river flow records that we can use in such water bodies as they exist, or to model long-term flow duration curves in ungauged catchments. That's where our hydrometric monitoring program comes in. We need national abstraction and discharge information, and that's where, since 2018, the National Abstraction Register has been particularly useful. And then we need cumulative modelling tools, such as the Qube application that we're currently using, which assesses the impact of groundwater, river and lake abstractions in a combined way and produces naturalized and influenced flow estimates. There's some screenshots of the Qube application on the right hand side. And where we identify risk, actual flow and level measurements, what will be required ultimately to quantify risk. And in the case of groundwater abstractions, that may mean pumping tests and associated measurements on nearby watercourses, etc., on a risk-based basis. How does this work theoretically? Well, if we look through a proposed eflow assessment example, we can take this theoretical catchment with the uplands on the left, and the river makes its way to the east, flowing out to an estuary on the right hand side of the map. And this is the cumulative flow of the Q95 as you move down the catchment. And this is the eflow, moving from a region of high sensitivity to abstraction on the left, medium sensitivity in the center of the catchment, and low sensitivity on the right hand side. And that's the class changes are shown by the steps in that green line. And that green hatched area is the envelope of abstractable water. That is the usable resource in this catchment. But we have a series of water abstractions, and we have a series of water discharges. It can be for drinking water, hydropower, navigation, wastewater treatment, etc. And what we do in our application is model the impact of those influences to produce an estimate of the actual Q95 in the catchment, which is the dashed black line that you see there. And what we are trying to do is avoid exceedances where we breach the eflow, such as that red hatched area. We're trying to manage those out of the system. So when we're assessing this information, currently using the Qube application, what we're trying to do is gauge the difference between what would naturally be present in the river and what is present after influences. The net influences of abstractions and discharges are taken into account. And this screenshot from the Qube model, I think, shows that quite well. So what we have here is a flow duration curve from a point on a river. The blue flow duration curve is the naturalized flow, and the orange flow duration curve is the influenced flow. This is the annual flow duration curve. And we see here in the box on the top right, this is the mean flow, and natural mean flow is on the top there, and the influenced mean flow is at the bottom. There's a 3% difference in those. And the mean flow, you know, in an abstraction sense, you tend not to see huge differences between the impacted and the natural flow. But this is where it's important to look at the Q95. When we look at the low flow that we typically experience, shall we say, August or September in a typical year, and if we look at the influence on the Q95, the natural Q95 here is about 19 litres a second, whereas the influenced Q95 is about 10 litres a second. So, you know, it's essentially a 48% difference in the model. Now, that would lead us to, as we look in more detail at this water body and to see if this was an impact at a water body scale, and to see if the model data was actually accurately reflected in the field. And groundwater abstractions will be taken into account in this as well, and proof would be sought as to whether or not they were impacting on a river in such a way. So everything is assessed cumulatively, and the modeled data is used to drive field investigation. And the Q95, where we don't have storage, where we don't have impoundments or reservoirs, the Q95 is the metric that this will essentially hang on. So it's very important to understand the process and understand the cumulative nature of what we're doing and where the sensitivities lie. In terms of how groundwater is taken account of in the model, if you take a look at this diagram, it shows a river winding its way through a valley and a borehole on the right hand side. And we know from our abstraction register the location, pumping rate and pattern of the borehole. It can be given to us down to monthly detail by the registrant. We know the distance from the nearest watercourse. We have high level estimates of transmissivity and storativity from the work that the Tobin report with the GSI did on bulk aquifer parameters. And that can all be used to calculate the stream depletion factor. So it basically calculates the amount of water that abstraction from that borehole would lead to the flow in the river being reduced by. So just by way of example, in the second cycle River Basin Management Plan characterisation risk assessment, what were the results? Well, that assessment found that up to 3% of rivers, 9% of lakes and 4% of groundwater bodies were potentially over-abstracted. More detailed assessments are currently being carried out using data from the abstraction register information. So the figures above are likely to change, and we have a significant increase in the amount of abstractions and the volume of abstracted water that we know about. We have some information on associated discharges, but that is, I suppose, still a work in progress. But those figures can and will change because the information that we have has changed. Just to note that this is a surface water test, and groundwater bodies here deemed to be over abstracted, it refers to localized surface water impacts and not to the overall groundwater balance in the groundwater body. So just to discuss the 2018 Abstraction Regulations as they currently stand. It was brought in mid-2018. There's a requirement to register any abstraction in the state, temporary or permanent, that is greater than or equal to 25 meters cubed a day. An abstraction means the doing of anything whereby water is removed or diverted by mechanical means, pipe or any engineering structure or works from any part of the water environment, including anything whereby the water is so removed or diverted for the purpose of being transferred to another part of the water environment. So it's quite all-encompassing in terms of what an abstraction means. An abstraction point means any borehole, well, sump or inlet pipe whose primary purpose is the supply of water for drinking or other purposes. So it encompasses all abstractions for any purpose. The National Abstraction Register is to be maintained by the EPA, and from now on, all new abstractions greater than or equal to 25 cubes a day must be registered via the Eden portal, and they must be deregistered once they have permanently ceased. As most of you are probably aware, abstraction legislation is currently being drawn up. The abstraction bill passed committee stage in the Oireachtas in late 2020. It is expected to come before Dáil Éireann this year. The precise details of what it will entail are still being finalised. The abstraction registration is to be included in the legislation, and the current rules will be remade in that legislation, in primary legislation as opposed to in an SI. It will provide ultimately for the risk-based licensing of abstractions greater than or equal to 25 meters cubed a day up to 2,000 meters cubed a day, and all abstractions over 2,000 meters cubed a day are likely to require a license. As it stands in the draft of the legislation, all abstractions over 2,000 cubes a day will require a license. So, in summary, you've seen there's a wide range of hydrometric data and information, both observed and modelled, available online from the EPA, the Office of Public Works, the Geological Survey, the ESB, the Marine Institute, Waterways Ireland, and other bodies. The model data sets are available online, but treat them with caution. Use them as a guide, but I suppose always, be very aware in your mind that they should never be used to replace field data, and field data will always be taken as the yardstick by which the model data should be measured, and not vice versa. The National Monthly Hydrology Bulletin is now also available online, and it's a very valuable resource for getting an instant snapshot of current or preceding antecedent conditions. I think there's also an RSS feed shortly coming out, and that'll be shared on social media, so you'll be able to sign up for the monthly bulletin and it will drop automatically into your inbox each month, which should be quite useful. So keep an eye out for that on EPA Twitter and Instagram. The Water Framework Directive eflow requirements are now driving the introduction of abstraction legislation, as we've seen. The precise details of that have yet to be finalised, but we should know more later this year, and I suppose guidance on how that will be applied will be forthcoming from the EPA in due course. Assessment methods for eflows will of course evolve, but they are likely to have similarities to the methods that have been previously employed. They may become more detailed, there may be extra elements, but they're, I don't think, going to be a million miles from what we've already seen. And finally, I think it's very important to bear in mind, and I think this is quite a good thing, that groundwater and surface water are now being considered interconnected elements of the overall water resource in this assessment, and we're considering their impacts and their usefulness in tandem, and it's a huge step forward for us nationally. So I think it'll be an interesting journey. We'll all learn a lot along the way, but from our perspective, if we can keep the hydrogeological community informed and provide appropriate guidance, I think we'll be in a far better, a far more sustainable and a far more resilient place in years to come. Thank you very much. And finally, I'll just provide some useful links to the data, the EPA Local Authority data, OPW, GSI, ESB, Marine Institute, HydroTool model data, Flood Studies update portal, and finally, as I've said, the monthly Hydrology Bulletin. Thank you again. So that's all from me. Thank you very much.